So, welcome everybody to join us in this week's lunchtime lectures at the Open Data Institute. My name is Elea and I'm a senior consultant here. It is my pleasure to introduce today Richard Woodard from Ethic Lab. Richard and I have been working closely together for the last few months because Ethic Lab is one of the 7 winners of the Stimulus Fund, Innovate UK project that is designed to encourage innovation and award projects with funding and support from the ODI. The challenge that Ethic Lab has set out to tackle in this program is to find use cases to test out concepts such as federated learning, to enable organizations to collaborate and share data to gain strategic insights, but without uploading the datasets to a central database. Today, Richard will talk about how federated learning models work and how organizations that handle sensitive data can benefit from it. Before I hand over to Richard, just a few housekeeping things. So Richard will speak for about 20 to 25 minutes. You will have opportunities to ask questions at the end. If you have questions during the talk, just put them into the chat and I will read them out at the end. Also, I'd like to remind you that this talk is being recorded, so we can put it up on our YouTube channel. And I'd like to remind everybody to make sure that you turn off your camera and also your microphone. Thank you very much. Over to you, Richard.
All right. Thanks, Alaya, and thanks to the ODI for giving me this platform to speak to you all. Thanks everyone for coming. Happy Friday. I hope we're all hanging in there. I'm here today to talk about the notion of digital collaboration without data sharing. This is an idea that my colleagues and I have been working on for the last sort of 9 months or so. And as Alaya said, thanks to the ODI Stimulus Fund, we've been able to road test these ideas with some kind of real life collaborators. I'm not going to get too much into the specifics of the work we've been doing with the collaborators, partly because it's still ongoing and I don't want to preempt the outcome. And kind of partly because what I really want to do today is to kind of give you some sort of ground level background behind the idea. I think this is quite a new concept. I sort of want to sort of start at the ground floor really, and just invite you to explore this conceptual space with me because, I really think this is an idea with a wide range of applications and lots of untapped possibilities. I'm very interested to hear what the ODI community thinks, we might be able to do with this. Just a little bonus intro slide there, there's the details of Ethic Lab and my email. I'd really like to encourage anyone who's interested to get in touch with me after this talk. I'll start with a sort of a quick summary of what I mean by this concept of data federations. So it's an approach to digital collaboration which seeks to exploit the possibilities that are offered by distributed privacy-preserving data technologies, such as federated learning or distributed data mining. And for time reasons, I'm not going to get too much into the kind of fine technical details of how these things work. Although, if you've got questions, I'll do my best to answer them. The key thing to get across here now is that there exists a range of technologies which offer the ability to for different organizations to work collaboratively with their data without sharing it and without collecting it in a central location. You might have heard the phrase bringing the code to the data rather than the data to the code. This sort of describes the basic principle behind technologies like federated learning or distributed data mining. They involve running analysis or training models on separate data sets, and then sort of aggregating the learnings from those discrete processes, so that the result you end up with reflects the totality of all contributed data, without requiring that data to have been shared beyond its original location, and without requiring that data is held in a common standard. So the point really I have to make is that these technologies exist, and they're within our reach. At Ethic Lab we've built and tested instances of them. We've just finished development actually on a sort of general purpose federated learning tool, which can be modified to address sort of all manner of kind of specific problems. I'm a little hesitant to say this, but as far as we know, we're one of the first companies in the UK to be offering something like this publicly, in terms of a sort of general purpose, rather than a tool which is specifically designed for a particular problem or a particular sector. So the question that I want to talk about today is, having established that these tools exist, how do they change the calculus for how we might organise digital collaborations? And when I use the term data federation, what I'm really talking about is this kind of altered space of possibility. So, what does the concept of a federated approach mean for how we consider organisational structure, cooperation, strategy, governance, all these things in relation to digital institutions or data access initiatives? So just to kind of let you in on the structure for the rest of the talk, I'm going to kind of tell you a bit of the story of how we came to these ideas. I think it's a good way to kind of illustrate what we mean by them. Then I'm going to try and highlight some of the unique possibilities which I think are afforded by this approach. And then finally, invite you to kind of help me think through the possibilities of these ideas and maybe some of its potential applications. So the story begins about 2 years ago, when Ethic Lab was commissioned by Innovate UK to do a research project on digital technologies in the access to justice sector. The access to justice sector is sort of ecosystem of charities and other organisations who have been given the job of propping up our collapsing legal system. So, the backstory to this, about 10 years ago, the government decided to start cutting legal aid, and they sort of withdrawing it more or less entirely from certain areas, such as family, employment, welfare. So this has created a situation where it's extremely difficult for poor people who have problems in any of these areas to have proper recourse to the court system. So the mission of the access to justice sector is to address this situation, partly through kind of campaigning, advocacy, and other activities, but really primarily by offering free legal advice and support to people who can't afford a solicitor. And our mission with regards to this project that we took on was to sort of develop an overall picture of the sector and how it works, kind of assess the sort of current level of digital maturity, and then to propose strategies which would deploy digital technologies to provide systemic benefits for the sector as a whole. So we did a load of research, kind of reading reports, interviews, fieldwork, stuff like that. And what we found, to grossly oversimplify, was a sort of generally low level of digital maturity amongst organisations, and a history of digital initiatives which didn't scale past the pilot phase. So the next question is, why was this the case, and what can we do about it? Well, in the end, we came up with a suite of 5 strategies which the sector could pursue to try and address these issues, which are documented in the report that we wrote, which I'd happily share with anyone if they get in touch with me after this talk. And the one we're concerned with today related to the problem of data sharing and collaboration. So the issue with the access to justice sector, and I think this goes the same for other kind of charitable sectors, and you know, to a certain degree, you know, other aspects of the economy in general. It's very complex and fragmented. You know, there's this vast array of small, medium, and large organisations, all doing vital work, but sort of pursuing more or less kind of local programs rather, with a limited ability to understand themselves as part of a broader system and to act collectively. And if you want to develop strategies which are going to support the work of the sector at a system-wide level, which was our brief, you know, you need to have oversight of fundamental activities. You know, stuff like how many people need help with what sorts of legal issues, national, regional, local levels. What kind of support did those people receive? What were their outcomes? So, you know, broadly, what are we doing and is it working? And, you know, this is the kind of intelligence which can be the basis for strategic decision making. So at the moment, there isn't anyone in the sector who holds or gathers data on this scale. You know, there's two ways that this could change. Number one, someone, probably the government at this point, I guess, establishes a kind of large top-down institution or initiative to impose digital uniformity on the sector. Number two, kind of existing stakeholders work together to address this strategic data deficit. Now it's, you know, it's our feeling that number two is actually in the current climate more feasible and kind of more like morally and politically preferable. So that was the sort of eventuality that we tried to address. I'm sure for many people here today, the case for collaboration seems sort of self-evident. But nonetheless, I'm going to spend a little bit of time going through it, you know, partly because I think these are points which have general application beyond the access to justice sector, and partly because I've learned through personal experience that these sort of fundamental questions, you know, can't be taken for granted, and actually often bear restating, you know, for both, you know, for my own benefit and for people we've been working with. So why collaborate, and specifically around sort of questions of data and digital initiatives? Well, first of all, there's the pragmatic kind of technical reasons, you know. So collaboration in a lot of cases is simply the only way that you're going to assemble a data set that's kind of large and diverse enough to encompass the activities of something that's complex as a, you know, an entire sector of social activity. You know, data only achieves true value at scale. You know, it's only at this point that sort of you can start applying kind of complex technologies like machine learning. You know, you know all this. Then there's the kind of social level. So, you know, this example I've been discussing is an area where the scale of the challenge demands, you know, the pooling of resources and expertise. It requires collaborations between charities with differing expertise, between kind of advice giving and advocacy, between sort of charity and pro bono, cooperation with the court system. So there's this need for multi-sector collaboration, and, you know, I think this applies to most of the most pressing kind of social challenges we face at the moment, you know, like COVID and climate crisis probably being, you know, two of the most pressing examples of that. And then finally, there's a political rationale for collaboration. So, you know, in principle, the access to justice sector is sitting on the single greatest resource documenting people's experiences with the dystopian nightmare, which is the UK legal system circa 2021. You know, they know things the government doesn't know, they know things that the courts don't know. And this is potentially a source of great power to act on behalf of the people that they serve. So, you know, if you're able to empirically demonstrate the effects of government policy, or to make strategic predictions, you know, to be able to like predict which people are more likely to have their benefits illegally sanctioned by the DWP, for instance, this changes the balance of forces, you know, vis-a-vis the sector and the government, and puts the sector in a much stronger position to bargain for funding and policy changes, or even to kind of act independently to address emerging crises. my general point here is that collaboration affords a means for smaller actors to overcome information asymmetries, which allow kind of larger organisations to dominate particular sectors or markets. This is, of course, the model through which big tech has captured a lot of the markets that it works in, and is seeking to extend itself into further markets. If we're interested in creating different kinds of digital economies, ones which aren't based around monopoly power, and that are potentially more responsive to the needs of individuals and communities, then collaboration is going to be a major part of how we get there. Okay, so I've just sort of highlighted all these reasons for collaboration, which begs the question, if it's so great, then why aren't we doing more of it? That's because it's really hard. It's really, really hard. And there are a range of kind of practical, cultural and economic factors which make it extremely difficult to work together. And once again, I think the access to justice sector is a bellwether here for trends that we see throughout our society. So a big part of the research that we did was familiarising ourselves with these kind of barriers to digital collaboration. I'm going to talk you through them. Now. So yeah, we'll start with a biggie. We exist in a political economic system which is kind of hard coded to incentivize collaboration in lots of ways, aka neoliberal capitalism. What I mean by this, quite simply, is that even in sectors where you might not expect this to be the case, like the charitable sector, we have a system where the main driver for innovation is not values or purpose, but competition. For grants for clients and so on. This is a huge problem, and I can't pretend to have a magic bullet for it, but it's something that has to be addressed. How do we find ways to suspend competitive pressures long enough for people to meaningfully collaborate? Beyond that, we're getting into sort of more practical barriers. So things like lack of experience of successful projects, specifically at scale. So, why invest my kind of limited time and resources in a project when I don't have the first-hand or even second-hand experience that this will provide benefit? Resource constraints, a big problem for charities particularly. They're working on very tight budgets. Specifically, they often don't have dedicated, data people on staff. So it has to be other staff sort of moonlighting for stuff like that. Privacy and security of personally identifiable information. This is a big one for us. Obviously, it's something that our approach deals with quite well. But I kind of want to stress that it's one factor to be considered amongst many. It's not like you take care of privacy and security and like bang, this vista of possibility suddenly opens in front of you. But it is a reason why a lot of projects are just quite simply a non-starter. If you're dealing with personally identifiable information which pertains to some of the most kind of difficult and traumatic experiences of a person's life, you have to be very careful about how you steward that data. And the prospect of sharing it, obviously a big no-no. Issues about sort of the exposure of kind of proprietary data, another kind of big thing. And then the difficulty of agreeing and implementing common standards. We've found to be a big barrier for lots of organisations. It takes a lot of work both to decide what those standards should be, and then even more prohibitively for the kind of organisations I've been talking about to actually impose those standards and to take existing data sets and put them in the new standard and stuff like that. It's a lot of work. So, you know, these are extremely daunting barriers. And for many organizations, they make the prospect of any collaboration predicated on data sharing impossible. So our reasoning, you know, our approach to this was that, you know, just because something is impossible doesn't mean you have an excuse not to try. And if we could do something, you know, if we could come up with something that might help to any degree, then we'd have done something of real value. So our research led us to these, what I've been calling distributed privacy preserving data technologies. You know, I mentioned it earlier on, you know, that allow you to do things with data without combining or standardizing those data sets. And there's a sort of suite of them. So you've got things like federated learning, which is specifically a kind of machine learning technique, distributed data mining, which is kind of for finding insights and patterns of data. And then other things like sort of synthetic data, which is like a kind of mechanism for creating dummy data sets, or differential privacy, which is sort of introducing noise into data sets to sort of obfuscate the sort of sensitive information. There's a range of technologies is the point, and they each have their own properties and they might be more or less useful in different situations. And what this suggested to us is that it would be possible to design collaborative projects which would accommodate the specific barriers which would otherwise have produced a particular group of organizations, prevented, sorry, a particular group of organizations from working together. What I mean by that is this, like having agreed that they have common values and a shared goal, a group of organizations can use the space of possibilities that's opened up by these technologies to design a project which allows them to achieve something together, whilst remaining within their existing codes of practice, regulatory frameworks, and time and resource capacities. So just for the last bit of the talk, I'm going to kind of sketch out what I think are some of the basic characteristics of this federated collaborative structure. So number one, the collaboration is based around the development and ownership of a digital tool. So like a federated learning algorithm or a distributed data mining module, rather than building a kind of consolidated data set or a network of data sets. So that's your starting presumption. What possibilities does that enable? The federation's purpose driven. So you start by agreeing what it is you want to achieve, and then you develop a technical and governance structure to deliver those goals sort of within the relevant constraints which are at play in your particular situation. The federation building is a process, and the goal of that process is to sort of fulfill these four kind of basic prerequisites. You know, these are the four things that the federation kind of needs to be able to do in order to function. And these would be built through a series of workshops, which would be led by you know, expert facilitators. You know, institution perhaps such as the ODI, or even, dare I say it, Ethic Lab. You know, the important thing is that what these people bring to the collaboration is technical knowledge, and perhaps even the capacity to build technical solutions, but also like a broader understanding of the kind of social dynamics of collaboration, and also the relevant ethical dimensions. So they're in a position to make sure that the federation has fully considered those aspects of what it's trying to do. So what are some of the kind of possibilities that are opened up by a federated approach to collaboration? Number one, it mitigates concerns around privacy, security, and proprietary information by allowing collaboration without the sharing of data. You know, I think this allows collaborations to happen which would otherwise be impossible. It's also relatively kind of streamlined and kind of, given the right circumstances, a less complicated prospect than some other kind of comparable approaches like anonymization, for instance. It doesn't demand extensive behavioral change and kind of massive labor in terms of data cleaning and standardization and stuff like that. Rather than being responsible for the management of a large data set, what the federation owns is the product of the collaboration, so the federated learning model or whatever. You know, I don't want to kind of undersell the amount of complexity that's involved in deciding how you manage the ownership of that and how you kind of distribute the value amongst members, but it's less, I think, than the complexities which are involved in kind of stewarding a large, complex data set. It doesn't require all partners to be aligned on all issues. So, you know, let's say that one partner considers a particular data point to be sensitive or proprietary, whilst another one doesn't. In a different situation, that would be a kind of fundamental impediment to collaboration, but, you know, here it isn't. Because you would be able to structure the collaboration in such a way that you know, that sensitive data point would never have to be disclosed. You know, this way it's an approach which kind of can accommodate different perspectives and different ways of working. You know, it doesn't impose kind of technical or cultural homogeneity upon the collaboration. You know, I think in this respect it's got great potential to support cross-sector collaborations. In the first instance, it allows the collaboration to be focused around a specific goal rather than a kind of broader and more like complex set of variables, because you're designing a tool which is specifically to address a limited set of questions rather than compiling a data set which has you know, a vast range of uses that are in some cases quite difficult to anticipate. In this way, I think it creates a space where sort of deeper relationships of trust and understanding can be built over time, and potentially allow partners to engage in more demanding collaborations down the line. The final point, the foundation of a successful federation, you know, we believe is creating a kind of network of partners who are committed to achieving shared goals and prepared to take on the challenge of sort of figuring out for themselves how are we going to achieve this? How can we build the collaborative structure that's going to allow us to accomplish our goals? You know? So this isn't a hack. You know, it's not a kind of technical fix for the fact that our society is so divided and atomized. You know, it's not blockchain. It's a set of technologies which kind of open up a conceptual space which expands the possibilities for what we can do with purpose-driven collaboration. So just by way of conclusion, you know, this isn't just kind of theoretical for us. You know, we're kind of doing this work right now, and you know, I'd really like to welcome anyone who's interested in joining us, either for a discussion or even to explore, you know, projects that we might work on together. Otherwise, you know, I know it's conventional for audiences to ask speakers questions at the end, but I thought I'd just pose a few questions of my own, because I think they're quite, you know, these are some of the questions which are interesting me and playing on my mind at the moment. So, you know, if there's anybody who feels like they would like to speak to any of these points, then I'd be very interested to hear what you have to say. Otherwise, that's it. Yeah, I think I've probably gone over time. My email's down in the bottom corner there again. So, you know, again, I just, you know, if you aren't able to ask a question now, or there's not, you know, space for it, I'd really, you know, please get in touch. I'm, you know, really excited to discuss this with anyone who's interested. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. Customary, I would now ask a question myself, but I see questions are coming up. So I think I'm gonna open up the floor straight away and also hopefully give a bit space to the questions you ask back to the audience. We have kind of a clarification questions from Neil, and he says, what was that phrase, distributed and privacy? Or was it something different? It sounded like a useful way of describing it, but I might have misheard. Can anyone confirm the phrase?
So it's distributed privacy preserving data technologies. It's a bit of a mouthful. It's something that I've struggled with quite a lot, actually finding a snappy way to summarize what these technologies do. But they're distributed in that they don't require the centralization of data. So so federated learning, you send a training model to the separate data sets, and then what centralizes the learnings. So that's the distributed aspect of it. And then privacy preserving, because the privacy of those individual data sets is protected by this approach.
Then we have two questions from Jenny, who says, hypothetically, if you were tasked with bringing an organization's data operation into the 21st century, and you had a long aim of data collaboration, what would be your watchword in designing your own internal system/standards/processes? And her second question is, you mentioned low levels of digital maturity in your justice sector project. I'd be interested to hear about your experience of assessing that across a heterogeneous set of organizations.
Okay, quite a lot to work with there. So the first question: what would be my watchword for bringing an organisation's data operations into the 21st century? Well, to me, I think purpose is probably the watchword. I think start by having. It's important to start by having a very clear idea of what it is you want to achieve, both at sort of kind of the sort of macro level of, what are your values, what are the values which you would like to see manifested in the world, and then at the level of kind of specific goals. And that's the sort of philosophy that we're trying to kind of design into how we're thinking about the data federations. It's a structure that we hope allows organisations to unify around these sort of questions of values and goals, and then design the kind of technical and organisational framework that will allow them to execute it within the structures of sort of regulatory compliance and according to what sort of resources they have available. Because at the moment, those sorts of constraints are very often experienced by organisations as reasons why they can't even attempt these collaborative projects, which is, there's no fault of their own. There's no system to allow them to kind of reckon with those restrictions at the moment. Sorry, Leila, what was the other question? I've forgotten.
Absolutely, I meant to say, please prompt me again. She says that you mentioned the low levels of digital maturity in the justice sector and project, and she would be interested to hear about your experience of assessing that across a heterogeneous set of organizations.
Okay, yeah. That was, it was a really fascinating experience, involving sort of kind of mapping exercises to sort of locate the organisations we wanted to talk to. Heterogeneity is one of the most important characteristics of the sector, because you're going from like big institutions like the Law Society, who has its stake in the sector, to very small kind of local charities, and then kind of field work, and kind of interviews with the people who are providing these sort of essential services. I mean, just the thing you take away from it is just what a complex task providing kind of strategic oversight and direction for this kind of complex system. You know, what a complex task that is, because so many of the kind of structures which previously had supported that, like, you know, legal aid, for instance, have been drawn down. And I mean, what I hope our suggestion would be able to do in principle is offer a way of sort of rebuilding some of that from the ground up, rather than imposing it from the top down.
Then we have a very practical question from Tian Feng. You mentioned this model overcomes needs to clean/aggregate data centrally. How does this help guarantee trustworthy data quality and model output, especially in the context of numerous partners with desperate data and technical capabilities? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really important question. It's a design problem. So you have to look at you have to look at what's available and what you're trying to accomplish on a kind of sort of case by case basis. The principle behind what we're suggesting is that you design the specific question that you're trying to address, and then you put that specific question to the various different data sets. Again, it's going to depend which sort of technology you're using, but just for the purposes of an example, let's say you're doing a kind of distributed data mining approach. The key thing is, so let's say the data points that you're looking after, I don't know, like time, for instance, it's held in a slightly different format in each of the different data sets. You can design a module that's going to be able to account for those differences and sort of do the standardizing for you, as it were. But you need to understand what the differences are between the different data sets. You need to have a certain degree of insight into how the data's been held. So that's the job for the federation. Is to create the platform where people are able to kind of come together and have the sort of informed discussion around what data are we collecting, what format's it in, what are the problems with it, what kind of oversight do we need to apply to this process in order to make sure that we're not walking into a kind of garbage in, garbage out sort of situation. That's the job of the federation. And obviously, if what you have is just a bunch of data sets which are kind of too messy to do anything with, there's no overcoming that. But on the other hand, if it is possible to through working together to accomplish something, then you've created a kind of collaborative forum which allows you to do something which otherwise wouldn't have been possible.
Then we have a question from Peter, which really kind of follows very snugly on that. He asks, how would the algorithm overcome the issues regarding the consistency issues in relation to different data descriptors in different applications?
So that's that we're talking more federated learning in this instance, I suppose. I mean, what I just said to the previous question still applies to a certain degree. You also, have the question of scale. So, getting enough data to kind of train these sort of very kind of data hungry algorithms and and models. Again, that's a people problem as much as it's a technical problem. But I think a collaborative structure which lowers the barriers to working together has some promise for being able to assemble collaborations on the scale that's required to kind of use that technology meaningfully.
We have another very good practical question from Martin, who asked, is there any template governance document available to kick off such an initiative? Any practical model we can follow?
In terms of template documents, we certainly have our own documents that we've been working on, which will be shared in some form or another, I think, towards the conclusion of the ODI project. To a certain degree, up to a certain point, the kind of governance issues are the same as with any other kind of data institution or data access initiative. You have a lot of the same problems and considerations. So existing resources are very useful there. The question is what kind of problems and issues are specific to this particular approach and this particular model. I can talk about that a bit, I suppose. The other thing is, models of people doing this sort of out there already. There's some in the kind of healthcare sector, particularly in the US. I think the context of the US with its sort of fragmented, privatized healthcare system has created a situation where they don't have the kind of data infrastructure that the NHS does, for instance. So these sort of technologies have proven quite attractive in that context.
I guess I'm a bit wary of time, so I'm trying to ask the question in the order that they kind of build up on each other. I think we have another question from Nick to think about what the key motivators or reward mechanism for encouraging collaboration could be. And he says, great presentation and topic.
Thank you. That's very kind. Reward mechanisms. It's a really important question, isn't it? I think personally, my sort of kind of preferred way of approaching this issue is, I'll talk a bit about my personal experience, I suppose, in trying to find sort of incentive structures that will encourage people to kind of participate in collaborative projects. I think I used to be much more inclined to try and provide people with the sorts of incentives that I thought they would already kind of recognize. If you entered into this data collaboration, then you could get like a data pack which would you can take to your board of trustees or whatever at your 3-monthly review and show them all the great stuff you've been doing. But I guess from experience of finding that approach not particularly effective, actually, I think I've come to see that I think you have to try and really sell people on the kind of transformative benefits of collaborating. Like, working together in this way may be a way of sort of doing what you're already doing, but a bit more efficiently, because you've got, because you get data which allows you to sort of evaluate your practices in a more kind of granular way. Or it might be a way of actually kind of transforming the way that the sector that you're a part of operates, altogether. And I think it's, for me, what I feel like I've come to understand is it's finding that sort of transformative story of how people can find new ways to kind of realize their values in the sector where they work. It's finding that story for people, which is going to be different for each different sector that you're trying to work in. But that's, to me, that seems like the real way to motivate people.
And then we just probably have more questions about the actual technology or technologies or concepts. And it's like one kind of very, I guess, like kind of fundamental question is from Neil, and say, I'm sure I won't be the only one who is wondering just how this looks like. Is it a big server in the sky that feeds in data, or is it a big central runtime compute capability that hoovers data sets into memory only, or something else?
Well, maybe it's a bit late in the presentation to be fessing up to this, but I mean, I'm not a programmer, so there's only going to be and we can go a certain way before we hit the limits of my understanding of how this works practically. I mean, my understanding of federated learning, for instance, is that what you would do practically is that you would send like a kind of secure link which contains the training model to each of the participants in your federation, and they would click the link, and it downloads the model onto their system, and it does its work and then returns to the central server. I mean, it's a very kind of as I understand it, a very computationally lean, if that makes sense, way of working, which is, I think has always been one of the attractions that have sort of kind of drawn people to develop it in the first place. I mean, I'd definitely encourage people to kind of contact me with any kind of technical questions that they've got, because I can put them to our to the eggheads on our development team, and they'll be able to answer them in much more satisfactory detail than I can.
Maybe that's a good point again to put up your last slide so that everybody can see your email address, and also the questions you kind of put out into the space, which maybe people might want to think about and send some feedback back. And then I have one last very technical questions, which may or may not go to your address, but go to one of your colleagues. And that's from Guy, who says, how is this different to some Kaggle competitions and more specific solution to distributed analysis such as Numerai? Both incentivized by rewarding participants, though Numerai seems to have solved the overfitting issue by requiring a participant stake.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is definitely a question that that is stretching the limits of my expertise. The idea of participant stakes is very interesting. I'm certainly open to the possibility of models like that as a way of sort of managing collaborations and incentive structures. But I'm also kind of hesitant to embrace ideas which like could be seen to kind of replace kind of deliberation and relationship building. Our perspective is that the kind of technology should be a platform for the kind of the sort of old-fashioned analog work of people sort of negotiating and kind of figuring things out together. Although obviously I'm aware of the problems that working at a certain scale or a distance can pose for that sort of approach, which is why I don't rule it out.
So we are very, very much going hard towards the end of the time, but maybe we can squeeze one last question in by Natasha,
Sure.
Who asks, the data federation model sounds like a good structure for distributed citizen science projects. The data is collected by different groups and there are benefits to collaborating beyond this. Do you know of examples? Can you comment?
Do I know of examples in citizen science? No. I'm not aware of any examples in that space. That sounds like a very kind of diffuse kind of collaborative structure. So I think that would perhaps pose a bit of a problem for the kind of the way that we've been sort of conceptualizing that sort of work. Because how do you organize a kind of governance structure in that sort of context? I suppose I don't really know enough about how sort of citizen science groups function to really speak to that. One area that I'm extremely interested in exploring is co-ops. Like energy co-ops, for instance. So you have like a sort of relatively localized co-op, which has its own kind of governance structure and own sort of data sharing practices, but also obviously kind of has kind of common cause and values with all other kind of green energy co-ops, insofar as they all care about creating a kind of greener energy economy. So I think the way our model would work there is it could potentially provide a platform for co-ops to start kind of exercising their values at scale, but without requiring them to all start kind of holding their data in exactly the same way, which I think, given what I understand about co-ops, would probably be quite a difficult undertaking.
Thank you so much, Richard, for your brilliant presentation. And thank you, everybody, for coming and all the good questions. If you have more questions or want to comment and give input on Richard's questions, email him at rich@ethiclab.co.uk. Thank you.
Thank you.